Hey there, this is Joseph Mattera, a few days before Christmas. Talking to you from my house here in Bay Ridge. And look, I'm so excited. I just want to announce that our podcast is going to start in the beginning of the new year. What a great time to start 2020 vision. 2020 is going to be a great year for all of us as we trust God to do greater things than He has in the past. And in this podcast, we're basically going to be dealing with the application of the gospel to culture. And why do we want to do this? We want to do this because the Word became flesh. It tells us in the Gospel of John, chapter 1. That's a very deep concept because it tells us in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God. Well, it tells us that the Word is Jesus. And in verse 14 it says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." In the Greek, that word dwelt is tabernacle. And so Jesus came to earth, tabernacled. This is the time of year we celebrate that, the incarnation, the advent of Christ. He tabernacled among us. And He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, which means that Jesus came specifically to humanity to immerse Himself in our life, in our culture, in our history, so that what is known of God in essence, which is a mystery because He's not a man, will now become known in essence through His humanity. God is invisible, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth, but Jesus was God manifest in the flesh. And because of that, He taught us that God wants to communicate in our language, through our culture, through our habits, through the various nuances that enable us to function as a civilization, as families, in marriage, in jobs, in work, in politics, economics, education, music, art, science. And so what we want to do in this podcast is what Jesus taught us to do, the Word becoming flesh. How do we apply the gospel in the context of our life? We want to deal with also some controversial subjects related to, politics. We want to talk about certain things that are going on right now in the country. Should Donald Trump be impeached or be removed from office? We want to talk about some of the scandals that are going on and certain people ministering under a dark cloud. We want to talk about the rise of social media prophets. Is that biblical? Can there be abuse in the prophetic? What can we do about the abuse? Do we just shut down the prophetic altogether, or do we have guidelines? What does the Bible teach us about that? We want to talk about, Kanye West. I listened to his new release on Jesus is King. I loved it. Was his conversion legit? Is he going to be manipulated by megachurch pastors and other popularists, people who are involved in popularizing the gospel? And is that consumerism? Is that enterprise in the gospel? Is he getting sucked into that genre? Was he already there before he came to Christ? Is he really showing what it means to be a Christ follower and who he's doing life with now and what he's doing in terms of ministry? So we want to examine all of these different things. We also want to talk about, for example, Netflix has recently come out with some kind of show depicting Jesus as someone who is gay. We want to deal with that subject. We want to deal with the fact that how we usually try to make God in our own image instead of reflecting God in our life. And how do we distort the gospel, theology, and the Bible so that we don't have conviction anymore? And that's what people have done through the years. Is this another example of that? And so there's so many things I could talk about. I'm really excited because I believe that this is the most exciting time in human history. I hope you join us. We're going to have a lot of young voices as well. People maybe you've never heard of that have tremendous insight into the gospel, into culture. We're going to have interviews with people that I know whenever I go to minister all over the world. We'll involve them in the podcast, ask them questions. So there's going to be very diverse, very broad in regards to the people who will be interviewed, as well as the topics, the subject matter. And we also want to deal with theology. We want to deal with what are some examples of present-day cults. What are some examples of erroneous aspects of the gospel that are being presented? What about hyper grace? What about legalism? What about extreme holiness? What about sectarianism? What about denominationalism? What about Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, Anglicanism, the fragmentation of the denominations and even individual evangelical churches? Should evangelicals try to Christianize America? Are evangelicals doing more harm than good when they stand up for politics? Are we continuing to perpetuate the polarization of our nation by standing up for Donald Trump or coming against him or dealing with politics in general? Should Christians be involved in politics? That's another question we're going to deal with. So it's going to be really exciting, really fun. I hope you join me in the beginning of the new year. This is Joseph Mattera signing off. God bless you.